If you want to learn, you have to first listen.
Welcome to episode 28 of Matt O'Donnell Wants to Know, a podcast to feed our curious minds. I'm Matt O'Donnell, and I want to know who you are. I want to know what you do. I want to know why Amazon delivers to a different door at your house every time they come. I want to know what matters to you and why. I've spent the past 15 years as a professional bass player. That means I've covered a lot of miles and talked with a lot of people. I've found that the person deeply interested in a topic is often more interesting than the topic itself, and the bigger picture is found in the details. That makes for a fantastic excuse to share conversations with people who I think are great. This time on the show, I am joined by Sarah Gavigan, the founder and CEO of Otaku Ramen here in Nashville, Tennessee. More on that in a moment. Thank you for the wonderful response to episode 27 with Aaron Smith. Most of the feedback coming to me has been about the discussions we had about certainty, acceptance, and peace, and all that. That seemed to really resonate, so thank you for all who listened. If not, you didn't hear it, go back, check it out. It's a great chat. If you're hearing this podcast in release week, I am somewhere in the middle of the Caribbean on a Princess cruise ship, playing with the band Arbo for the Scythian String Break Cruise. Kind of very exciting to get out of the doldrums of Nashville post-Christmas. You know, I love Christmas. I really do. It's my favorite holiday. All the other holidays can drop dead for all I care. But Christmas is the one for me. But then I find once Christmas ends and the rest of winter has to happen, it's a real bummer, isn't it? So that's the period we're in now. At least it's starting to warm up a bit after some bone-chilling cold. At least we got one decent little snow in there. But yeah, what a great opportunity to be wearing shorts and enjoying some nicer weather and playing some music. So back in 2013, I think it was, I stumbled upon a pop-up for some ramen in Nashville. I had come to enjoy ramen when I was living in Boston and attending Berklee College of Music at the Mente Japanese Noodle Cafe that was right around the corner from one of the main buildings on the quote-unquote campus. I hadn't really found anything else like that in Nashville, and so I was very excited when those pop-ups started. I can't quite recall the first one I ever went to, but I definitely remember a collaborative one between Otaku Ramen and Hattie B's Hot Chicken. It really hit the spot, as they say, and so I started going to more of the otaku pop-ups. A little later on, they started doing a residency at the Nashville Farmers Market, which was a great time, something a little reliable on schedule, and it was always nice before a gig or something to go grab a bowl of ramen and then head downtown. Long story short, Otaku got their own place and now their own multiple places, and it's been a thriving business. Somewhere right around when they opened their first legitimate brick and mortar locations is when I started to do this ramen snob thing, where I started to think that having gone into New York and gone to some nicer ramen shops, if you can even call ramen shops nicer versus another, you'll hear that all talked about in the discussion. But I went to Ivan Orkin's place in Manhattan, Ivan Ramen, and that was wonderful. And so all of a sudden I started to look into this, and I was hearing and thinking that this wasn't authentic ramen in town. And I was wrong. I didn't understand the notion that it's just not possible to do hardcore, authentic Japanese ramen in America. And so it took me a while to get off of that. I am reformed now. And last year, I went to grab a bowl for the first time in a long time from the East Nashville location of Otaku, which is now no longer there. And I was pleasantly surprised that the owner, Sarah Gavigan, brought out our bowls of ramen. After I'd gotten through some of it, she kind of came back out and I waved her over and said how much I was enjoying that bowl. And we got talking and sort of made some haphazard plan to have her on the podcast. I, of course, didn't exchange any contact info with her. And so there became this little cat and mouse game of me trying to get in touch with her, which eventually happened. Then it took a little while with same thing as my work. Her work got busy at the end of the year and we kind of just chased around it. But as the first of the year came around, Sarah was able to work it out that she could come over to the studio and have a great conversation with me. We get into all kinds of things like that traditional ramen thing and how it's impossible to understand the cultural differences and that therefore American ramen is just never going to be like Japanese ramen. We talk about umami building, the history of ramen, and then one of the most important things to me, and one of the reasons I wanted to have her on, was to start talking about the Nashville restaurant scene. It is something that is dear to my heart as some restaurants are coming and going and a very unpredictable scenario, and I'm trying to figure out what's going on from someone who's in the trenches fighting it out. So we talk about that a good bit as well. Her 2018 cookbook, Ramen Otaku, Mastering Ramen at Home, should be available anywhere you like to find books. And I don't want to go a moment further without mentioning her new Substack, which we don't talk about, but I think is important to mention, and I think you might love. It is called Obsessed, which is the loose English translation of the word otaku in Japanese. And you can find that at iamobsessed.substack.com. Also, it will be linked in the show notes. But you can go there. She's sharing a bunch of recipes that are fleshed out versions of things she's doing on Instagram. And what I like about a lot of those recipes is that they're not always things that conceptually we wouldn't think of on a regular basis. But she's using a bunch of ingredients that she has learned throughout her study and her time and her obsession over creating great ramen and good food to build some at least interesting twists on dishes that you may already love. There are for sure some there that you don't know about and you will learn about them and it'll be the first time you've ever made anything like it. But definitely go have a look at that. It is worth supporting. And with that, now I'll take you to my conversation with Sarah Gavigan. It's weird. I just got this chair. It's the first time I'm sitting in it for podcasting, and it feels so much nicer than anything I've sat in so far. It's another thing you see on podcasts all the time are people who have a much nicer chair than their guests, and it feels like throny. Their setup is incredible, and the guest is not. I think podcasts are anti-hospitality.
That's really funny.
Will Gadara could teach them a few things.
You know, he lives here now.
I do, yeah.
He's my neighbor.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
That's cool. Well, first of all, thanks for coming. I'm so glad. I'm so glad to talk with you. I don't normally do some things like this, but I thought that this was an interesting idea. Can you sort of existentially tell me what ramen is and what it means to you, like on the whole?
Yeah.
That's a big question, but it's that kind of thing where I'm bad at sort of giving base level stuff for listeners. I like jumping right in conversations and sometimes it's not there. And I think that a vast majority, I don't know about vast, a small plurality of my listenership has probably never had a great bowl of ramen before. So if you can talk about that just on a very like base level, which I know can probably be hard. But
yeah, I think I'll start with what I say to people when they come to the shop or to the register and they've never had ramen before. I say that ramen is about three things. It's about wheat, salt, and fat.
That's great.
Okay, so that's the first thing that ramen is about. You go down a couple of levels. The next thing that ramen is about, what makes ramen ramen, is the noodle. The noodle is so specific to other noodles that it's almost like it's very interesting to see all the food influencers that are out there now. Everybody makes ramen or calls it ramen.
Sure, yeah.
It's not ramen unless the noodle is made with a sodium bicarbonate. So the wheat itself, let's compare pasta to ramen.
Yeah.
Okay. So pasta is made with water, wheat, and egg.
Mm-hmm.
And it has, egg is the binder.
Yeah.
An average of 20% hydration, depending on the noodle.
Okay.
Ramen, water, sodium bicarbonate. So the Japanese call it kensui,
Okay.
which is basically a liquid version of baking soda.
Oh, okay.
So that is what kensui is.
Got it.
And the next thing that is the most important is the hydration. Hydration 15% to 18%. So if you think about how a noodle cooks and how it responds to cooking and how it responds to being in a bowl of hot soup, that is what makes ramen ramen. So pasta, if put in boiling hot bone broth for 5 minutes, will completely dissipate.
Okay.
The egg will just basically, it will die, right?
Okay, yeah, that
it
makes sense.
will become something that is no longer edible.
Yeah.
Ramen can hold up to that, and that is how it was created. So if we take it all the way back to history, what we do know, and we don't know if this is 100% true, is that, of course, the noodle came from China.
Right.
And that the village that had this particular noodle had a lake that was alkaline. Baking soda makes water alkaline.
Right.
So it is a science. It is literally about science and how the alkalinity of the water gives the noodle its texture, its bite, and its girth. So we have 2 noodles and 3 noodles in the shop.
Yep.
But the 2 main noodle, one is the tonkatsu noodle, which is the very thin white noodle.
Yes.
And the second is what's called the classic noodle, which is the wavy yellow noodle, which is really what, like, when people think of ramen visually, that's what they think of is that noodle, right? Because I guess by the standards of instant ramen, that's kind of what we've been programmed to believe, cup of noodles and all of that, right? Yeah. But the tonkatsu noodle, believe it or not, has 15% hydration, and it is stronger than the other noodle.
Interesting.
So what's really fascinating about that noodle to me is that, you know, like when you have a really great bowl of pasta that's truly al dente, you bite down on that noodle, there's only one layer.
Yeah.
It's the same all the way through.
Right. Yeah.
Not with ramen. There's 2 layers, maybe 3.
Okay.
That teeny tiny little noodle's got 3 layers in it if we do our job right.
Incredible. Okay.
And so that is what alkalinity does. So that tonkatsu noodle cooks in 30 seconds.
Yeah. Right.
So all of the exact same ingredients except for one change that entire science. Now, sometimes if people want to argue back to the tiny little bits, they will say, but there is egg in ramen, egg powder, white egg powder in very, very, very small amounts.
Okay.
To create a little bit more protein binding, but nothing compared to the egg that is in pasta.
Sure. Yeah. I go through a few different pasta recipes, but I always kind of come back to Thomas Keller's that is just egg.
Yep.
Anything that has like a bunch of water in it, because I'm always thinking to myself, hopefully I can do this slightly cheaper because getting great eggs and using that much egg is an expensive thing to make your own pasta.
Yes.
But it doesn't compare. It doesn't compare. That it is such a sort of discourse on the noodle, because I think that if you were to ask the average person who has had some great bowls of ramen, they would talk about the broth primarily. That would be the first thing that they would think of.
Well, you know, I think if you go to like the true baseline ramen, obviously it's a bone broth, right?
Right. Yeah.
But some of the greatest ramen shops in Japan use soy milk.
Interesting.
Or like in our case, in our vegetarian ramen, we use barley tea as our base.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
So
I don't know that I've had the vegetarian ramen over there.
It's actually, I think, a big misnomer. And it's something that we deal with a lot at the shop. Like, especially in the winter, people are like, can I order an extra broth?
Yeah.
I'm like, no, you can't. And people get very upset about it. And that's really because they believe that it's a sipping broth, like a bone broth that you would buy in the store.
Yeah.
It is not, because it's so engineered. It doesn't taste the same without the noodle. It doesn't taste the same without the toppings in it. It just doesn't taste the same. Every single item that goes into a bowl of ramen affects the taste, the flavor, the texture.
Yeah. I mean, for being something that is, I don't know, these are the hard things. And these are one of the reasons why I was like very interested to have you on the show.
Yeah.
Is because I feel like there is spectrum debate about ramen, about being simple versus complicated, or I know that most people talk about the fast versus slow thing, that it's a fast.
Slow to make, fast to eat.
Right, absolutely. But, you know, like the intentionality of the layering in a bowl of ramen is out of control.
Well, you have to talk about umami when you talk about that,
Yes,
you know,
of course.
and what umami is. And actually, it's really funny. My mom just texted me today and was like, I'm going to a ramen pop-up with her two friends, one who is a retired French chef, and they think I know what to look for. What is umami?
Yeah.
It's my 87-year-old mother.
Incredible.
And, you know, I love, like, I'm not, first of all, I failed algebra. Like, I am not a super sciencey person, but I love the nerdy detail facts.
Yeah.
And the fact that umami is the fifth taste was discovered by a Japanese scientist in 1913. Do you know what actually defines umami? What makes umami?
Oh, gosh.
If it's not on the top of your head, you
no,
probably don't.
I don't. Yeah, probably don't know it off.
So there are 7 amino acids present in food that we eat. 2 or more of those amino acids together create umami.
Okay.
So it is literally stacking of amino acids. So, for example, tomato, 1 amino acid. Parmesan, 3 amino acids.
Right.
Bring them together, umami.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? You can kind of keep going. So glutamate being at the very top of that stack, N-acetic acid, it kind of goes down from there. So beef is N-acetic acid. Pork is another one. Chicken is another one. They only have, each one of those proteins only have 1. You bring them together, you have the higher chance of umami.
Right.
So it's that literally, first and foremost, that is what a ramen chef uses to create their bowl.
Right.
Is the science of umami. And I had no clue about the science of umami until I became friends with a gentleman named Yuji Haraguchi, who at the time, when I started my pop-up, he started his pop-up in Brooklyn, and he was doing it at like Smorgasburg and at Smorgasburg. But he had 2 things I didn't have. Number 1, he's Japanese. And number 2, he worked for True World, the fish supplier, for about 10 years.
Incredible.
He was actually the conduit between the United States and the Tsukiji fish market.
Oh, interesting.
So he knows more about fish than almost anyone I know.
That's cool.
And his namesake ramen is a tuna katsu.
Ooh.
So he makes a tonkatsu style ramen with tuna bones. It is spectacular.
I bet.
And so he had, so there is a ramen museum in Yokohama, and it's really fun. You kind of go down into this basement, and they ask ramen shops from all over Japan to do like a residency there.
Oh, that's
and so there's
great.
like 8 ramen shops, and it's really worth going if you go to Japan.
Yeah.
It's like a 20-minute, maybe 30-minute ride from Tokyo to go to Yokohama. And like there are ramen shops in there that would take you days to get to, but you can have their namesake bowl in this little place.
That's great.
And so Yuji was asked to do his namesake ramen there. And one of the parts of the agreement of being in the museum is that you have to get your ramen made into instant ramen so they can sell it in the gift shop.
Interesting.
So having your ramen made into an instant ramen in Japan is the pinnacle of being a ramen chef.
Interesting.
Isn't that funny?
I would imagine so. I mean, that if it's something that you can.
And so he went to the factory and, you know, did all of the testing and everything. And they gave him this packet that had all of this broken down. And it was in Japanese, and he was explaining it to me. I'm like, no, you got to translate this for me. And so he went through the painstaking process of translating this for me and giving it to me. And it was literally like a light bulb went off in my head.
That's your Rosetta Stone.
It was my Rosetta Stone. You nailed it. It was literally life-changing. I never would have found my way into this science, because ramen is science, had I not been given that key. And that unlocked everything. Once you have that, it's literally just stacking of amino acids.
Yeah.
So if you go to Japan and you wonder, why do they make a broth out of pork and chicken bones? That's why.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Chicken alone has not enough umami to get the job done.
That's good to know. Yeah, I wouldn't have known how umami is built. I only know what I'm looking for, that like middle palate kind of thing that's
right.
gonna do like a wash over.
Yeah.
I currently have some great koji fermented coffees.
Oh, wow.
And they do like,
never heard of that.
yeah, they're not very widely out there. There's only a few of them. Sump in town here did a couple that were very nice.
Interesting.
And,
does it make it smoother? Does it take away the acidity?
There is a little of that. It just sort of adds like this very savory note, which if it doesn't remove the acidity, it at least balances it out.
Interesting.
You know, it makes it a much more like rounded kind of thing. It's very interesting. It's, you know.
Have you ever made koji shio?
I have not.
Oh, it's so easy.
Is it easy?
Yeah. So you can order the dehydrated koji'd rice on Amazon.
Okay.
And then basically you're just doing a percentage of salt and water to wait.
Okay.
You're shaking it all together and giving it a shake once or twice a day and waiting 9 days. And then you have koji shio. That
sounds great. I would love to work with koji. I only picked up that copy of Koji Alchemy at McKay's the other day.
Yeah.
It was
I'm sure that the koji shio recipe is in there.
It's it was obviously unread. Someone got that book as a gift and thought, no way. I find so many books like that at McKay's that are just like not.
I know, right?
And it was super cheap. But I always find the notion of doing anything with koji at home like daunting.
It's really not daunting at all. Several ingredients that you can get into your kitchen really quickly that will literally change the way you cook. So when you make that koji, what you're going to notice is that there will be a clear liquid that will accumulate at the top.
Okay.
That's called the gold. And so if you go to Amazon right now, you could buy the liquid Koji Gold liquid.
Okay.
And I use it to like marinate chicken lightly or heavily. But basically what it does
I have used that before. I've just never made it myself.
But making the shio koji is so easy.
Great.
It really is. And it is a game changer in cooking. You can leave it in the kind of rice form and like toss it in cucumbers and let that ferment for a couple of hours. You can smooth it out and use it literally as a complex salt. Use it as a salt when you're making dressings.
Yeah.
To kind of do exactly what you said it does to the coffee. It's going to do the same thing. It's just going to add another note.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, the koji itself is a bacteria and the rice is a sugar.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's just going to add what fermented sugar can add. You add salt to it, it becomes a complex salt.
Yes.
So the Japanese will use it to marinate, to pickle, and also to season. The same way they use shoyu to season.
Yeah.
They use shoyu as a salt. They don't use it as a dip like we do.
Yeah. Which is, just silly.
Oh, God, you should see their faces when we do it.
I bet it's interesting that you bring that up because that is something that I know that you and I had sort of needed to like dance around getting this recording done for a little while. And I'm in a way, for a couple of reasons, I think. One we'll get to later, but glad that it did take us a while because I started reading that Matt Golding rice noodle fish book. And he, discusses who knows if I'll say it quite right, the notion of like the Japanese word shokunin, which I think is sort of an umbrella for talking about I don't know if you can call them controversies about American ramen versus Japanese and tradition and authenticity and these things like that. But so much of that idea, which shokunin, as I understand it, is the notion of super dedicated focus in a very narrow way, or like dedicating your life in a way to something that's one thing.
Yes.
And I have not been to Japan, so I will not pretend to act like I truly know, though it is on the top of my list of places in the world to go. We were going to go for our honeymoon, but that was still right at the end of COVID, like the beginning of 2022. And we just didn't want to take a chance of something like blowing up an entire trip.
It's not exactly a relaxing vacation.
Yeah. Yeah, that too. So we ended up going to Hawaii.
Better choice for honeymoon.
For sure. So having never gone, again, I wouldn't pretend to, to understand. But I think that Americans cannot understand the notion of a restaurant of that singularity. And so I think that is a reason why it is most likely, bastardized and most likely culturally impossible to attain.
Yeah, I agree. I think, first off, I have always believed that, if you're going to make ramen, it has to be the star of the show.
Right.
And so there are izakaya that serve ramen. And no disrespect, but I think that it has to be your only wife. It has to be your only mistress because it is so complex. And I think that, we have really struggled through the years to maintain a balance of tradition and giving people what they want.
Sure, absolutely.
And that is really hard to do in America.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But, there's another term that kind of goes along with that term called kotowari. Kotowari meaning craft. Very similar to the singularity, right?
Yeah.
So kotowari would mean a very small shop, 5 or 6 seats. Only the chef makes your food. There are no other employees, maybe one.
Yeah.
Right? That experience cannot be replicated here.
Right, absolutely.
For the simple fact that America is driven by developers in real estate.
Yep.
And that would not be possible to do here for that very reason. That also, you would not be able to make enough money and work 5 days a week with 5 seats in your shop.
Right. Yeah,
right?
absolutely not. Yeah.
And sadly, that is changing in Japan as well. Over 300 ramen shops closed in Tokyo this year.
Really?
Yeah. So, I think that notion that we're talking about, that singularity will always exist in Japan because it is truly a part of their culture. They do one thing, they do it really well, but it also takes incredible density to do that type of thing. Like, you don't do that out in the countryside, right? But ramen shops are eponymous there, so it's a bit of a different measuring stick.
Yeah, of course.
You know?
Yeah.
But I think that when you go to a place in America that does one thing and does it really, really well, there are very few left.
Yeah, absolutely.
There used to be more, right? But now we are kind of a veritable shopping mall all the time because Americans believe in anything, anytime, anywhere, when I want it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's true of just as basic as produce, that no one believes in cycles of produce and things being in season. Like, we want avocados all the time. We want great tomatoes all the time.
Yeah.
And not only, we don't need to get into a discussion about GMOs for any reason. That's a long rabbit hole. But at least in terms of soil stripping, the way that it happens in America. And
well, I think Mother Nature's going to take care of that for us, unfortunately.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
But you're right. And I think that, so we got into this topic of craft and stuff based on you saying about using shoyu as a seasoning or as a dipping.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks to a broader thing about presentation and trust in people that are giving you food. Because I would never want to, unless instructed by a chef, dip something in shoyu, because I know that they know better, especially, again, having never been to Japan and having never experienced that level of it. But I already know that if there isn't a recommended thing, even the first, probably dozen times I went to pho shops, I would ask someone like, okay, what amount of which sauces would you recommend for this?
Yeah, this is why we don't leave sauces on the table and why we will never do that.
Yeah.
I mean, in ramen shops in Japan, you will see several things on the caddy. You'll see like Szechuan peppercorns sometimes. You'll see vinegar. You'll see some sauces, but they respect that because they eat it first and then they add.
Yeah.
But again, it's a cultural thing. Like, I'm from Columbia, Tennessee.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like, there's no way that I would know any of this had I not ventured to learn it. And and I will say this, my beloved Los Angeles, my poor beloved Los Angeles, it made me the food person that I am today.
Sure.
Because that city is unlike any other in America, where you can travel to pretty much any country in the world in 20 minutes and be fully immersed in their culture and their food. There's a valley, the San Gabriel Valley, 1 million Asian. You can pretty much go to any province in China in that valley. And the chef is from there and the food has been grown for that. So like, our entire food system is homogenized in every single way. Right. So I don't think there's ever any reversing that with our culture. I think that there will always be a small percentage of people that get it more than others, or people like yourself and myself that really get out there and learn and want to know more. And it becomes a hobby and something that we truly love is to geek out and learn more about food.
Yeah.
But it's not my job to teach Billy Joe Bob how to eat a bowl of ramen.
Yeah.
It just isn't. I just let them do what they want. They call it spaghetti. I can't change that.
Sure.
And that, I think that singularity that we're talking about is that kotowari. Let's go back to that. Kotowari is important if you're a ramen lover to know I am not a Kodawari ramen shop, and I will tell you why. We are not a craft ramen shop. We are a volume ramen shop.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is not what we set out to do. I set out to be a Kodawari ramen shop. But it became clear that that was not what the community needed.
Sure.
What the community wanted was something very accessible and something that was for every day.
Yeah.
To be a Kodawari ramen shop today in the United States is almost completely prohibitive. The amount of imports that you have to bring in to make that bowl of ramen traditional is impossible.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. Because I used to be, there was a long time where I was a traditionalist, kind of a traditionalist Nazi about that sort of thing. And that is, life is a journey, not a sprint, And so kind of letting go of that has been like a huge thing in my life, in a number of different ways, particularly in food like that. But that, what you just described is the thing, is the ingredient importing, that it just makes it so.
Yeah. I mean, people are like, why can't you get it to taste like Japan? Let me explain.
Yeah.
Their pigs are different. Their chickens are different. Their water is different. We haven't even started.
Yeah.
I get 2 kinds of soy sauce, shoyu. They have hundreds of thousands.
That's right. Yeah.
I get 2 choices for kombu. They have thousands. I get 1 choice if I want to use a preserved fish. They have thousands.
Yeah.
So miso, thousands. So their umami cabinet, so to speak, is so much deeper than mine that it is not even a contest. I am not ever going to be able to make Japanese ramen in America, nor do I want to.
Sure.
It is not Japanese ramen. It is American ramen. I was taught by a Japanese ramen chef. He is my sensei, Shigetoshi Nakamura-san. And he explained that to me so beautifully when I started this journey and really put it into perspective so that when I go to Japan, if I see a bowl of ramen that looks simple, I know it isn't. And I know when I taste it that I'm looking for the layers.
Yeah.
The layers of complex salts, the layers of the fish, of the clam, of the scallop, of all of those things that we cannot do here.
Yeah.
That make it unique only to Japan. And by the way, they make ramen differently in Taiwan. They make ramen differently in Korea.
Interesting.
It doesn't make it any more or less traditional than it is in Japan. You have, do you know the history of ramen? That's a really fun one.
No, not really.
So how old do you think ramen is? Yeah, this is my favorite question.
I mean, part of me wants to say young comparatively, that it's not like a time, a centuries old thing. It's not, because that's one of the things, right? Is like, there's a stuffiness about kaiseki that is sort of alleviated by ramen being sort of everything that kaiseki is not.
You are correct.
And
it is post World War II.
Interesting. Yeah.
Not that long at all.
Yeah.
Right? So the history of ramen, phenomenal book, if anybody wants to geek out and read it, is where I learned all of this. And basically, the noodle came from China with Chinese immigrants pre-World War II. Not that long before the war broke out, maybe 10, 15 years. The war broke out, no more wheat, no more rice, biggest famine in the history of their country. Post-World War II, we were sending wheat to Japan when we were occupying Japan, when we were making deals.
Yep.
So the Chinese made their little carts and used that American wheat to make that alkaline noodle that was shelf stable, that had no egg in it.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
It wasn't shelf stable to them, but
right.
it wouldn't get sour, wouldn't go bad.
Yeah.
They were taking bone scraps and making soup, seasoning it with kelp and shoyu that was being made in other villages. And they would take it out to the factories and feed it to the factory workers. And the factory workers called it stamina food. And so it became beloved to Japan through this lens, through this time period.
Sure, yeah.
So one, and not a good argument to make, but one could argue that it was American wheat that fueled the ramen industry.
Interesting.
So we have this kind of very strange yet inexorable connection between the Japanese and the Americans, we were involved. We were there. It happened in a time of crisis.
Yeah.
So I think that the Japanese connection to the food has grown in real time. It wasn't hugely popular in Japan until the 80s. And the first ramen shop to come to America was in 1992. So it is very new.
Yeah, I mean, I think of the first place that I had ramen there was a tiny little shop in Boston, in the Back Bay, but they didn't necessarily like call it ramen. It was just like the such and such like noodle house.
Did they call it chuka soba?
No, it was just whatever, like, maybe that is right. Maybe you're right.
So chuka is a derogatory term for Chinese.
Great.
And soba was what they called the noodle before it got its name.
Okay.
So soba does not use a sodium bicarbonate. It is a different recipe.
Right, yeah.
But it's kind of, the ramen lexicon is very messy.
Of course, yeah.
It's not a, pyramid by any means.
Sure.
But sometimes you will see ramen called soba. And in this case, if you were to go to a shop that made chuka soba, it would be the most traditional, basic, original version of ramen that was ever made in Japan.
Interesting.
So it probably was that.
Yeah, I mean,
Was it a clear broth or was it a cloudy broth?
They had both.
Okay.
It's just more that at that time, we're talking about like 2005 to
Sure.
2008. When, the closest thing really that you could get to ramen around was momofuku.
Yes.
And, that
We
is...
can't even call that ramen.
Right. That's what I was about to say. Is like, that is sort of a like American precursor
Frankenstein
to ramen. But
ramen.
yes. Yeah, absolutely. Though I will say the thing about breaking my feelings about being a traditionalist were totally shattered by David Chang's introduction to Ivan Orkin's book, in his way of just like saying... that like none
ramen
of these things
is dead.
Yeah, well, not quite that, but more the idea that like, you're never going to source the thing, so don't try and say, and just in a very simple battering ram way.
Yeah. That
sort of just made me think quite that way. But yeah, so in that time I would eat there relatively often because it was delicious, but I don't think that I feel like outside of places like Ippudo, which is aiming at a
mass market volume ramen.
Yeah, but Ippudo, I will say, does this thing where it feels very basic. It's not necessarily a very colorful bowl. Whereas when I think of, your shops, those bowls are full of color. There's a lot going on, that makes it visually appealing.
Yeah. Ippudo is by and large serving, when they came to America, Asian populations.
Sure.
So visually, people didn't need to be drawn in.
Right. Well, that's what I mean, is like it sort of speaks for itself in a way.
Yeah.
And that's what's nice about going to Ippudo.
It is.
But again, like you're doing something very different. You're not what you are and are not aiming for is served and sort of given levity by, having a lot of color, a lot of like stuff going on, but still maintaining balance and also an ability to eat it in a way that you can still eat it traditionally. Yeah. Like that's the nice thing about it is no matter what it is, the experience can still be a traditional one in like the American ramen.
Arguably the most creative and famous ramen master today is a guy named Minya Shono. His shops are called Mensho. And he's just started to open in America. He has his first shop in America is in San Francisco. And I can't remember where the second one was, but he just opened one in Arizona, which I thought was such a strange choice. But go look at his feed. Holy cow. You want to talk about colorful? He is so unbelievably creative. And I mean, his bowls are transportive. Literally. I mean, the first time I ever had one of his bowls was in Shibuya at the famous Parco department store. They have incredible food courts in these giant buildings. And he had a little ramen shop in there. And we were deeply inspired by the design of the shop and all of it. But like, I love his ramen because he's a real punch you in the mouth kind of guy. And it's just like boom, boom, boom. If you are looking for a nice delicate bowl of ramen, he's not your guy, and but really colorful and beautiful from that perspective, like true art.
That's cool. And it's great to be able, or for you to be able to say that he's like a modern master, and that I'm sure he probably takes a lot of shit in from traditionalists, but also that like,
they can laugh all they want, but he's laughing all the way to the bank.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's the other thing about, you were talking about volume versus, craft ramen. But if you're going to do American ramen, you should aim for the American capitalism of it as well.
Yeah. I mean, we've got the first 2 ramen chains coming to Nashville in the next 6 months.
Really?
Yeah.
I have not heard of this.
And so it's going to be very interesting to see. They're both big franchises. One's a little bit smaller, a Chinese guy from Flushing, New York. And the other one, I think they have 60 ramen shops America now. And he's Japanese by birth, but it does not even barely resemble Japanese ramen to me at all. Wow. So it's going to be really interesting to see how Nashville responds.
We're going to talk about Nashville in a little bit, because that's something that I am curious to hear from your perspective. So one thing that kind of came up in my prep for this and was thinking is in that shokunin thing, but also the word otaku, which is for, obsessed, and that is a derogatory word. Tell me how you perceive the fine line between like a singular focus being a positive and culturally like tentpole thing and the idea of like otaku obsession being negative, because they seem like they come from the same spring, but one is revered and the other, is not great.
I'll tell you how I found the name or the term and how I used it in a cookbook. And it was described as obsession. And I connected with that so deeply because that's how this all happened, is I became completely obsessed.
Yeah.
And to be totally frank, I knew nothing of otaku culture, nothing. I had never watched anime. I knew nothing. So I really connect with the word from the American perspective of obsession, but the literal translation of the word is at home. And it was used originally as a slur to describe people that had no social skills. Yeah. And so I'll never forget we have so many, white collar Japanese here because of Mitsubishi and Bridgestone and Nissan. And so the Japanese consulate for the Southeast is based here in Nashville.
Oh, okay.
So the general consul is here, and they switch them up about every 18 months. Some are good, some are not so good. But we had dinner with one consul and his wife, and I gave her my card, and the look on her face just told the story. And it was really funny because it was my first interaction with, traditional Japanese people that were very formal and very traditional. And, someone had taught me how to give them my card. You have to hold the card facing them with both your hands, and you bow when you give them the card. And when you receive a card, same thing. You have to take it with both of your hands. You have to read the whole thing, and then you have to bow and say thank you. And she did that. And then she looked at me like I had never been looked at before, and looked me up and down. And she said, "You are not otaku." And it just really, like, I have always been a very subversive person. Sure. Like if everyone else goes left, I go right, and vice versa. Same. That's kind of what makes me who I am, for better or for worse. I have been on so many councils of things, like when I was in college and all kinds of stuff. And people should have known better to know that I'm the contrarian. Like, even if it's not something I believe, I want the alternate view to be heard. And if it means that. Yeah, I'm the idea girl. I'm definitely not great in groups. Yeah. I think I've learned the same thing on sitting on councils and whatnot. But, the word to me, I think, I'll say this. I think we got lucky with that word. We're the only ramen chain in America that's called that. Yeah. And the word is just so sticky. Yeah. And it means so much to so many people now that many people find us simply for the word. Interesting. And so for that, I feel very, very lucky. Yeah. And now, this little dream that I had, this little thing that I started, it doesn't belong to me anymore. Yes, my name is on the LLC. Yeah. It is how I make my money, but the brand itself, it doesn't belong to me. It belongs to everyone else. Yeah. And they have made otaku what it really is. So, when I see a kid who, like, one day this was like 5 or 6 years ago. I was in the shop working, and someone came up to me and said, Sarah, could you come meet these guests? It's a girl and her father. They drove all the way from Knoxville. And I was like, oh, okay. And I go over, and it's like a 12-year-old girl in her anime shirt and her dad. And I should have, this is way longer than that. This is like maybe 8 years ago. And the original shop is 10 years this year.
Yeah.
So I should have seen that as a precursor of what was to come. And it was just so sweet because she had been watching anime and reading manga and had fallen in love with the culture and was like, Dad, I really want to have a bowl of ramen. And he drove her all the way from Knoxville. Yeah. And we find that over and over and over again. And, you know, it's like I've always said, ramen is emotional. Yeah. In a way that a hamburger and a taco will never be. It really is. And umami has a lot to do with that. Yeah. Because this is also a really fun fact about umami. So in the first or second year that we were open and I was working the line, before COVID, we had the whole front line was open. You could sit at the bar and like talk to the cooks as they were cooking. And this guy came and sat down, and he was like very specific that he wanted to sit right in the spot where I was. And he was a very clean cut looking guy, but he clearly had a mission. You know, he was like there to talk to me. And he ordered a bowl of ramen, and he started up a conversation with me. And he was a neuroscientist at Vanderbilt.
Interesting.
And he had just finished his study on umami. And he proved that the presence of umami on the palate sets off receptors in the brain that releases serotonin and dopamine. Ramen literally makes you happy. Yeah. So that really became a mantra for us. You know, our mission is serving happiness one bowl at a time. And I think it's also why you can explain why you can't put down a bag of Doritos. Yeah, for sure. And like, you know, MSG is, I call it the nuclear superpower of umami.
That's right.
If used responsibly, it is a great source of energy. If used irresponsibly, you will get a headache. And now we know why. Because you're not getting a headache because you are allergic to MSG.
All bullshit.
You are getting a headache because it is overfiring your brain.
Interesting.
So that was really a cool moment for me to understand like this entire culture and how it works. Yeah. And I think if Americans could really understand umami more, they would be better eaters and better diners.
I mean, the thing about Americans is like, it's not as though we're not interacting with umami. I mean, you said before, Parmesan. I mean, ketchup is an umami, bomb to not use a stupid tropey word. But yeah, like there's so many things that we interact with that are truly, umami based.
Every culture has their version. Yeah. You know, it's just, I think the Japanese version is very specific, a specific combination of things. But yeah, I geek out over that stuff.
Yeah. So I know that you were talking about how much you love LA, which I'm not an LA person. I'm a New York person. I mean, I basically grew up in New York. Yeah. So it is just a very different version of like a compressed world into one space. But one thing that Los Angeles has that I know that you love because I've read it in a few different places was going to places that Jonathan Gold recommended.
Oh, I love Jonathan Gold.
And it makes me think about how I wish that more cities had people that were like him to sort of promulgate their food scenes.
His name escapes me. Hidden Gems. His handle is Nashville Hidden Gems. He is Nashville's Jonathan Gold.
Interesting.
Yeah. He has that same, and I tell him that and he looks at me like I'm crazy because he doesn't know who the Jonathan Gold is. And I keep telling him, I'm like, you've got to understand who this man is. He is so important to food. He is so important to what you're doing right now because I mean, he never wrote a negative review, ever.
I didn't know that.
Never wrote a negative. He would go to a restaurant 6 or 7 times before he would write about it.
Yeah, which is great. I mean, and
watch City of Gold.
I've seen City of Gold. It's incredible.
And, I mean, some of his really early ones, you can't even find them anymore, his early reviews. But he's the only food critic to ever win a Pulitzer Prize.
Which is incredible. I mean, the fact that like...
his reviews are prose.
Yeah, that like... Ruth Reichl has never won a Pulitzer.
But her reviews are not prose.
No, you're right. I mean...
some of them are like haikus. I mean, so the first restaurant that he sent me to via his book was Chungking, which he became like super famous for blowing up. Yeah. And his original review, I will paraphrase, he said, the numbing, smacking flavors of the Szechuan peppercorn mixed with the numbing of the prickly ash is somewhere between the Novocaine of the dentist chair and the last time you could afford a lot of blow. He was just the best, you know, and he is the reason I do what I do today. I never would have eaten my first bowl of ramen if it was not for him.
Incredible.
Yeah. And it was a food court on Venice Boulevard in Centinela.
Yeah.
And Mitsuwa, most magical grocery store ever. It's a Japanese grocery store. They have one in Jersey. They have a few, like 6 in California now. There's only like 10 in the whole country. Yeah. But it's literally heaven for anyone that loves Japanese food. And there was a food court. And they had, you know, all the singularity, ramen, udon, tempura, you know, and I literally was just in a rancid mood and walked out of my office one day and decided I'm going to go there. And I walked in and I had an experience that I had never had before, which I called a collective singular experience. Because I'm from the South, where everybody waits until everyone's food hits the table before you eat. And you rarely eat alone in the South.
Sure.
Really. Maybe a drive-by at a barbecue place, right? But that's about it.
Yeah, there are very few instances.
And this was a very busy food court and felt like everybody else was in the same mood I was in. But we were all sitting there together, but separately, having this collective experience where people just ate their food, nobody talked, and then they went. And it was literally in a fraction of the time that Americans eat.
Yeah.
A bowl of ramen should be consumed in 5 minutes or less.
Right. Which, not to sidetrack you, but I was going to say something about that before, that it, in terms of it being an emotion, you said it's an emotional experience.
Yeah.
When eaten right, a bowl of ramen requires your focus.
Full focus.
In a way that, you know, should trigger your emotions. Like if you properly put all your focus into something and you're not moved by it, then you've done something wrong, or, you know, you need to think about yourself.
Yeah, no bite will be the same.
Yeah.
That's the thing, because ramen has layers.
Right.
You know, from the moment that we ladle out the stock at 210, it hits the bowl at 180. It hits the pass at 170. It gets to you at 160. If you wait another 3 minutes, it's a no-go. Yeah,
I mean, it's an entirely timed thing.
Because as the temperature goes down, the viscosity changes, because it's a very collagen-y bone broth, right? The noodle is going to start to take the broth in and lose. That's why you have to eat the noodle first, because that noodle keeps cooking in that really hot broth. So you have all these things constantly changing in a bowl of ramen. Yeah. One of my favorite moments in a ramen shop in Japan, the first time we went, we took our daughter. So I broke off one day and with my good friend Brian from Ramen Adventures, who I see every time I'm there, and he takes me to the best ramen shops. And anyone who's going to Japan, I highly recommend finding him online, Ramen Adventures, just on Instagram. He is phenomenal. And we went into this little Michelin-starred, tiny little Kodawari shop. And it was absolutely beautiful. I had never seen a little shop with such care to everything, like spick and span clean. Yeah. Every little piece of this was so well thought out. Chef in all whites. And I put my things down. You know, of course, I'm like eye spying, looking around, curious, you know, writing in my book. And he comes up to me and he presents to me with both hands a hair tie in a piece of wrapped plastic. Now, anyone who's listening may be like, what's the big deal, Sarah? What that meant was, please tie your hair back so you can experience my ramen.
Yeah.
It was so beautiful.
Yeah.
And it was such a small thing that we would never be able to do here, right?
Yeah, for sure.
That is such a deep part of the respect of eating a bowl of ramen. And I do think that is something that Americans will never truly understand.
Yeah, that's another thing that goes along with things we've been talking about the respect part. That is like a two-way. It isn't even like, I think that we would think that respect is a two-way street that way, but it is much more like 3-dimensional.
Yeah, it is.
You know, that way. Like there's an extra component that like pulls it that way. Anyway, sorry, I distracted you from talking about your first ramen. We're in LA and Jonathan
Well, yeah,
Gold.
and like that moment, you know, that I had that bowl and like it changed me.
Yeah.
I was like happy. I was like, whoa, what just happened? Right now
Yeah.
we know why. Right,
Yeah, absolutely.
umami. But then I just wanted to drag all my friends with me. All I wanted to do was go to ramen shops, and I think that Jonathan Gold was the one that gave me that zest and that verve for seeking out new foods and trying new things. And I feel so lucky that I got to have that experience and be in that city when he was alive and when he was doing that. Deeply fortunate for that.
Yeah. So, but what that was making me think about and saying about needing or, you know, there being people like that here is I think about the Nashville restaurant scene a lot. And I don't know what to make of it. And I am curious for some of your thoughts because you've been doing it long enough now that you are, you know, one of the forebearers to like the current thing that's happening of like a gigantic explosion. And I'll tell you how I perceive it.
Yeah.
I see hip new places open all the time, whether they're native, whether they're somewhere coming in. They can be great either way. You know, one of the things I'm most excited for is that there's going to be a Turkey in the Wolf here. And I love Turkey in the Wolf, and so that brings me joy to no end.
Yes.
Now, I feel like Nashville as a city will accept any of those things for about 6 months, and then something else will come along. I've been calling it like the shiny new toy syndrome. I
call it the shiny new penny.
Yeah. And move along to something else and leave things, you know, to rot almost immediately.
Yep.
And outside of a few places that seem to manage to buoy very well, it seems that this is happening to tons of great restaurants repeatedly for, I'd say, the past like 4 or 5 years. And I was curious on your perspective of that as someone who is like deep in it and also a food fan.
Yeah, it's complex. I think it begins with the tourism board and the way that they projected the brand of Nashville. And the way that they did that was through the lens of more is more.
Sure. Yep.
And, you know, we don't have to name names, but anybody who knows what I'm talking about knows what I'm talking about. And I think that that more is where we started. Now, many people don't know that Nashville was a corporate food town before those of us started opening these small restaurants. You know, many beloved chains in America were founded here, like Houston's.
Yeah, that's right.
That is now Hilltop, whatever it's called, Hillstone.
Yeah.
Right? That was Bricktops. The two founders split.
Interesting.
And one guy said, I'm good. You go on and create your billions. I'm going to stay here and run my restaurant.
Yeah.
So Hillstone was Houston's. Houston's was Bricktops. So Bricktops is the original Houston's.
Interesting. It's been forever since I've been to Brick. I mean,
yeah,
you know, I'm
but it's
as
so
guilty
good.
as like anybody else
like,
of.
It's such a old standard, right? Like you can really, you know what you're getting. But the independent food world did not live here. Nashville was a very sleepy town for a very long time.
I moved here in 2009, and especially coming from growing up in the Poconos with Brooklyn-born parents and so spending a lot of time there, and then college in Boston.
Yeah.
Like Nashville didn't seem like it was going to be for me for the first 4 years or so that I lived here.
I cried for the first 2 years. Then I moved back. But I think that has a lot to do with the creative culture of Nashville.
Sure.
That's the second piece.
Yeah.
The second piece was that when I moved here, I called it Amateurville. Still kind of is.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, because music was the thing and the rest of it was just corporate, healthcare, whatever, there was no creative culture here. Now, people may argue with me about that, and a lot of people have. But as somebody that worked in film, advertising, in a global creative culture in Los Angeles, nothing like that existed here.
No, people here don't know.
No. They don't understand what a true creative, competitive culture is like.
Yeah.
And I can remember, let's see, probably would have been like a couple of years after we opened the first shop. And
which was?
It would have been 15, 17.
Okay. I just always think of when you opened Pop.
Right.
Because that was 13. Yeah. That was the last time I was like regularly going until recently.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that like it just sparked something in me, and I was looking around. Maybe somebody had one of those like typical back patting conversations that just made me a little nauseous. Uh-huh. And, you know, when I first moved back here, it was such a small town. It was so delicious in that way. Like, but I was just so LA that everyone just rolled their eyes at me all the time. I was like, go, 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 move, 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 beep. But it was so clear to me. I looked around and I was like, so how long do we think it's going to take for everybody to sharpen their fangs? Mm-hmm. For us to stop being a back patting society, right? Yeah. So I think you start with more is more. And that's what's being sold. Sure. Right? Yeah. And then you take a look at this. I think a lot of people thought that they could come here and create that creative culture. Uh-huh. And again, I'm not going to name names, but people that took very popular restaurants from cities like New York and cities like whatever and brought them to Nashville and thought that they were going to have the same impact here that they did there. How foolish is that?
It's incredibly foolish.
And so, you know, it's not to say that nothing that isn't born here can't live here and exist here. But I think, unfortunately, what's going to happen is that Nashville will become a corporate food town again because we are all going to get pushed out. We are. I mean, I just re-signed my lease. Mm-hmm. I can only pay it for another 5 years. And then I'm done. Yeah. And that's a reality.
Sure.
So I think that, you know, it's sad that the developers keep developing. Yeah. And for example, for people that don't understand what that means, our West location on Charlotte, really amazing guy that built that place, that developed Sylvan Supply. Yeah. But then he sold it. And guess what?
The new owners are not as great.
No. They revalue it. And so how does Metro make their money in Nashville?
By revaluing everything?
Nope. So all Metro, different cities have different financial structures.
Okay.
Some do it with a tax.
Yep.
Right? The way that Metro is funded, property tax.
Okay.
Okay. So when you sell a building, they revalue it, the property tax goes up. Who pays the property tax? Me.
Yeah.
So my property tax just doubled, which makes it unaffordable to be there. So this is going to continue to happen.
Yeah.
So anybody that doesn't own their building is going to be in this position eventually. Yeah. If they can survive 10 years.
Sure.
The first 10 years of their lease.
Yeah.
If they make it that far, all of a sudden you look up and when you signed your lease, it was $28 a square foot and it's gone up incrementally and now it's $65, $75 a square foot. So that is not sustainable. So the economics are completely and utterly unsustainable. Yeah. So anybody that is signing a lease right now is signing at the very top of the market, but it's only going to continue to go up because the developers are going to continue to develop. So what's happened is that the more is more that got sold to all these major developers all over the country that have now come here and are building these giant structures. There is no independent restaurateur that could afford to be in any of those structures. So who's going to inhabit those structures? Big restaurateurs that are going to come in and they're not going to pay rent. So the game is going to change. Yeah. So it's unfortunate, but it's what's happening. And I've accepted it for what it is. And, you know, we've changed the way that we do business and we've changed our 10-year scope because of it. You know, it's no mystery that we closed East.
Yeah, which was heartbreaking. That space was beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Like, you guys did such a great job on that. That was such a nice thing. And not least of which, because it's very close to here. Yeah. You know, but it was just an enjoyable place to go in the middle of the day and have a bowl. And
I think I made the mistake that out-of-towners made, which is, you know, build it and they will come. Yeah. And I learned the lesson the hard way that, you know, a good part of the Gulch's success is that it's the Gulch.
Yeah, right.
And that you have to be in density if you're going to succeed. That, you know, Turkey and the Wolf will pull, but only for so long.
Yeah.
Those that decide to go into small neighborhoods, you can only survive for so long when literally 1,000 restaurants a year are opening in Nashville. Yeah. Last year, Metro handed out 958 licenses for new restaurants.
That's crazy.
And it'll be more this year. So it's unsustainable, unfortunately, for anyone.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
Whether you are old or new.
Yeah, when you describe it that way, that makes it absolutely unsustainable. It's just, so there's that end of it. I mean, it's sort of such a compounding of things because obviously everyone talking about food costs, going out of control.
Yep.
I was looking the other night, we have on the wall out here in the dining room a bunch of menus up, and our favorite place is Locust.
Yeah.
And
phenomenal restaurant.
Yeah, incredible. And just looking at some of the same dishes on menus go up in price just over a couple of years, and so there's that part too, which everybody is dealing with.
Which is a mystery because gas didn't go up, it went down.
Yeah.
But freight went up.
Yep.
Right. So I'm just in the process of renegotiating every single contract that I have in my business right now. I know it's not easy to do business with me because I have my fangs sharpened all the time.
Yeah.
And that's what I learned in Hollywood, for good or for bad. But, when you look up and your disposables have gone up by 135%.
Yeah.
You start scratching your head.
Yeah, there's something not right there.
And, you're like, hold on, my contract says that you're going to have an 8%, margin. Why are you charging me 26%? Oh, it's freight. What do you mean it's freight?
Yeah.
So, these are the things that we truly battle with every single day that restaurateurs are up against. And you've got to be a behemoth that is doing, $200,000 weeks for that not to matter.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting the thing you were saying about property tax. I have some friends that are about to open a spot on Main Street in East, and I'll be interested to see how that goes.
Do they own or rent?
No, they'll be renting.
Well, again, if you are about to sign a lease, make sure that you ask the current owner if they have any intention to sell, because if they do, it will be revalued and your cost will go up. So the way a lease works is that you pay your price per square foot and then you pay what's called CAM. And CAM is basically the charge for keeping the building in good shape, the maintenance for the area around the building, and the taxes. The taxes are all passed along to you.
Right, of course. Yeah.
The owner doesn't pay the taxes. So it's truly, truly unsustainable.
Yeah. So I was saying, when you take the thing, because I, don't know enough about real estate to know those things. And that's a very interesting part of it, and totally goes in line with everything that's happening in Nashville in all ways. But between that and the cost of goods, as we were talking about, and then also that thing of everyone wants to be in the new spot on Instagram rather than something that they love, repeatedly, I think is just not great. And there are so many very good restaurants that'll suffer because of it. And I've said this about music here in the past maybe 5-7 years, where I have started to get to that age where I now can think of bands from 10 years ago who were supposed to happen and then never happened. They got close and then never did. And I think that's what's going to happen with the good culinary scene here, is that there is this window that is maybe the past 5 years. Well, a little before that, because COVID, makes all that a sticky thing. But let's say the past 7 years, that there's a surging upward of great restaurants. And then
the tipping point.
Yeah, it'll probably never reach a good potential to be a thing.
You can't tell developers not to develop. You can't tell people not to build, right? Yeah. So how do you solve the problem? The only way that the problem is solved is an ugly, ugly answer. And that is a giant fucking recession.
Yeah.
That's the only way prices go down.
Yep.
It's the only way. And regardless of who you voted for, the only way prices go down is a giant fucking recession.
Yep, you're absolutely right. I am hoping to have on the show in the next couple months, there's an economist who I like on Twitter. And I just reached out to him and I said that I wanted to do an episode where he helps me make people understand what the economy, I'm doing hand quotes, means. because
Can we start with tariffs?
Yeah, all that. I mean,
I think they're going to learn the hard way.
Oh, absolutely. I
actually don't think he's going to be able to pull it off.
I don't think so either.
The corporations are going to hold him by the neck.
Absolutely. I mean, the fact that...
Well, Walmart already said.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. They already made a statement saying you will pay for the tariffs.
Yeah. I mean, I've known people who didn't get their Christmas bonuses in construction sites because
100%.
they had to buy supply, overload on supply now, hedging their bets on what that's going to be like.
Yep.
But I just think that when people say that they're concerned about, quote unquote, the economy, they don't know what that means. Or when people talk about it.
No,
That's why and this is what boggles my mind, that there are people who say that the stock market is the economy, or that used to be the thing. For a long time, people who didn't understand it all only looked at the Dow Jones because that's a line graph. You can look at a line graph and see, oh, good, plus, minus, good, bad. But factoring in GDP, consumer confidence, whatever the fuck that means.
Well, let's just go to a really simple one.
Okay.
Debt service. If you looked at the debt service collectively in Nashville 10 years ago, I would bet you it is 100 times today, maybe even 1,000 times today. So what that means is that 1,000 times more people building buildings, making things happen in Nashville are operating on debt.
Yeah.
That is also our government operating on debt
all the time. Yeah.
Eventually, that doesn't work anymore. It just doesn't.
No.
So, I mean, I'll be really frank. I got caught in that too with my own business. I'm not the only business that ignored the standard recommended debt service for restaurants and took those giant EIDL loans that are now a noose around my fucking neck. And with rising costs of doing business, which no one could have calculated, how do you win?
Yeah.
You know, so the economy exists in your own wallet, right?
Right.
But how is it calculated to get there?
Well, that's the question that with this economist that I want to have on is sort of what I said. Like the first thing is like, help me understand the things that economists say are the economy. And then how does the average person reconcile that to how they feel about the economy?
Well, what's also interesting about the economy is they still don't acknowledge Bitcoin. They still don't acknowledge cryptocurrency.
It's true.
What did Trump make in the last 2 days?
Yeah, like 50
billion.
Yeah, 50 billion.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a wild ride.
Yep. The next 5 to 7 years are going to be a whole thing.
Today is the day.
Yep. Well, I'm glad that you were willing to spend some of what could either be a day of farce or day of terror.
I mean, anything to take my mind off it, to be honest.
I agree.
Yeah, there's a song that I would listen to and still do every single MLK day. It's been around for like 30 years. It was this totally rando record called Mood Food. And this song is like 12 minutes long. And it's very kind of new agey. Yeah. But Chrissy Hines sings on it. Oh. And then MLK's speech is woven into it. Ooh. And usually my neighbor in California is a big time DJ and had a radio show there, and he would play it every MLK day. And I would always listen to it with the windows down and like with joy and glee. I wept today when I listened to it. Yeah.
It's not my favorite. Not my favorite thing. So
it's going to be a rough one.
Yep. Well, thank you so much for coming and doing this.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Bye. My thanks to Sarah for being on the show, being a captivating guest. That was a incredible conversation. Tons of information there. Don't feel bad if you've got to go back and hear some more of it. She has a wealth of knowledge and presents it exactly the way that someone who had been in the film and music licensing industry would present it. I learned a lot, and that's what I'm here for. Hopefully it's what you're here for. So I think we all won. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, share, rate, review the show. It is the most helpful thing for me getting Matt O'Donnell Wants to Know into the ears of more people. And that's how we make it bigger, make it better, make it brighter. You can find the show on Instagram at Matt O'Donnell Wants to Know. You can find my own page on Instagram. That is at Matt O'Donnell. Questions, comments, concerns, sticker requests, free stickers. You can find that by emailing mattodonnellwantstoKnow@gmail.com. Hey, I'm on Blue Sky now because, F the X. That is something I'm doing as a combined page. So that is just Matt O'Donnell on Blue Sky. That's going to do it for this time. Thanks for hanging out. Take care of yourselves. And remember, the best answer to a question is usually another question. See ya!